Imagine you are 22 years old. You are sitting in a plexiglass bubble on the belly of a four-engine bomber, 30,000 feet above Germany in temperatures of -40 degrees Celsius, watching flak bursts, black clouds of shrapnel, fill the sky around you so densely it looks like you could walk on them. Your job is to operate a single machine gun and protect the aircraft from Luftwaffe fighters coming at you at 400 miles per hour. You have no parachute on because it doesn't fit in your turret. If the aircraft goes down, you go with it. You are one of 10 men in this aircraft. On average, 1 in 4 crews sent on bombing missions over Germany in 1943 did not come back. This is what it meant to fly the B-17 Flying Fortress. Not the mythology, the reality. A machine so extraordinary in its engineering that it became the symbol of American air power in the Second World War. A machine so brutal in its operational conditions that the men who flew it aged years in the span of months. General Carl Spaatz, commanding general of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe, said it plainly. Without the B-17, we might have lost the war. Today we find out why. The B-17 story begins not in wartime, but in a peacetime design competition, and in an idea so audacious that the U.S. Army Air Corps didn't quite know what to do with it. In 1934, the Army issued a requirement for a new multi-engine bomber. The specification called for a plane that could carry a bomb load of 2,000 pounds, fly at a minimum speed of 200 miles per hour, and operate at ranges up to 2,000 miles. Most manufacturers responded with twin-engine designs. Boeing responded with something else entirely, the Boeing model. 299 had 4 engines. It was enormous, larger than anything the Air Corps had asked for. It carried machine gun positions bristling from its fuselage and wings at every angle. When a reporter watching its maiden flight in 1935 counted the gun emplacements and wrote that it looked like a flying fortress, the name stuck immediately, officially, and permanently. The prototype crashed during an Air Corps evaluation, not because of any design flaw, but because the test crew forgot to release a new gust lock system on the control surfaces and attempted to take off with immobilized controls. The crash nearly killed the entire program. The Army, cautious and budget-constrained, initially ordered the smaller, cheaper Douglas B-18 instead. But the Air Corps could not forget what it had seen. 13 pre-production YB-17s were ordered for evaluation. Those 13 aircraft performed so brilliantly in testing, demonstrating range, altitude, and payload that no other aircraft could approach, that procurement orders followed. By the time the United States entered the war in December 1941, the B-17 was the backbone of American strategic bombing doctrine. The B-17G, the definitive wartime variant, was, by any measure, an extraordinary aircraft for its era. 4 Wright R-1-820. Cyclone radial engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, drove the Fortress to a maximum speed of 287 miles per hour and a service ceiling of 35,600 feet. High enough to fly above most of the German fighter coverage, and above the effective range of much of the flak. Its operational range of approximately 2,000 miles meant it could reach targets deep inside Germany from bases in England and return, a capability no other Allied bomber in the early war years could fully match. The bomb load was up to 8,000 pounds on short-range missions, typically 4,000 to 6,000 pounds on deep penetration raids into Germany. But the feature that defined the B-17's identity, and gave it its name, was its defensive armament. The B-17G carried 13.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, positioned in nose turrets, dorsal turrets, ball turrets on the belly, waist positions, tail positions, and cheek positions in the nose. In theory, the aircraft could defend itself against attack from virtually any angle. The 10-man crew that operated all of this was a precisely organized system. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, ball turret gunner, 2 waist gunners, and tail gunner. Each man had a specific station, a specific weapon, a specific responsibility. In combat, they functioned as a single organism inside a 60-foot aluminum tube at 30,000 feet, communicating through the interphone system, freezing in temperatures no cockpit heating could fully address, breathing through oxygen masks that frosted over and failed with alarming regularity. The aircraft's structural toughness became legendary and documented in photographs that almost defy belief. B-17s returned to base with entire sections of tail blown away, with engines on fire, with hundreds of shrapnel holes perforating the fuselage, with landing gear that wouldn't deploy, with dead and wounded men aboard who had to be kept alive for the hours-long flight back across the channel. The B-17 absorbed punishment that would have destroyed a lesser aircraft and kept flying. That toughness was not accidental. Boeing engineers had built redundancy into every critical system. The aircraft could fly on 2 engines. Its fuel system included cross-feed capabilities that allowed functioning engines to draw from tanks serving damaged ones. The control surfaces were cable-operated rather than hydraulically dependent, meaning that hydraulic failure, common under combat damage, did not necessarily mean loss of control. The B-17 was the instrument of a specific and deeply controversial strategic concept: daylight precision bombing. The theory, championed by the U.S. Army Air Forces, was straightforward. Rather than the British approach of area bombing at night, dropping bombs broadly across German industrial cities to destroy morale and infrastructure, American doctrine called for precision bombing in daylight, using the Norden bomb site, targeting specific industrial nodes, ball-bearing factories, oil refineries, aircraft plants, rail yards, destroy the specific bottlenecks in German industrial production, and the entire war machine would grind to a halt. The B-17, with its high-altitude capability, heavy defensive armament, and precision bombing platform, was designed specifically for this role. American planners believed that formations of heavily armed fortresses could fight their way through German defenses unescorted, relying on massed defensive fire from the formation to defeat Luftwaffe interceptors. They were wrong, and the cost of being wrong was catastrophic. The first deep penetration raids into Germany in 1943 exposed the fatal flaw in the unescorted bomber doctrine with brutal immediacy. On August 17, 1943, 230 B-17s struck the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt plant at Regensburg. 60 aircraft were lost, 600 men killed, captured, or missing in a single day. On October 14, 1943, Black Thursday, a second Schweinfurt raid sent 291 B-17 against the same target. 60 aircraft were lost again. Another 138 were so badly damaged they required major repairs. In 5 days of operations around that period, the 8th Air Force lost more than 100 bombers. The loss rate was unsustainable. Mathematically, a crew assigned to the 8th Air Force had roughly even odds of completing a 25-mission tour alive. The problem was fighter range. The P-47 Thunderbolt, the main American escort fighter of 1943, could accompany the bombers only as far as the German border before fuel forced it to turn back. Once the escorts peeled away, the Luftwaffe scrambled every available fighter and tore into the formations for hours. The B-17's 13 machine guns were effective against individual attacking fighters, but a sustained attack by organized German fighter wings, using coordinated tactics specifically developed to defeat the box formations, found gaps no amount of defensive fire could fully close. Deep penetration raids were suspended after Black Thursday. The doctrine had to be rethought. The solution to the unescorted bomber problem arrived in the form of one of the most consequential pieces of engineering in the history of air warfare: the North American P-51 Mustang, fitted with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The Merlin-powered P-51 had a combat radius exceeding 750 miles, enough to escort B-17 formations all the way to Berlin and back. When P-51s began appearing over German industrial targets in early 1944, the strategic bombing campaign transformed almost overnight. Now the Luftwaffe faced a different calculus. It could no longer intercept unescorted bombers with impunity. Every time it rose to engage the B-17 formations, it faced the P-51s waiting for exactly that engagement. American fighter pilots, operating under orders from General Jimmy Doolittle to pursue and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it appeared rather than remaining tied to close escort, began systematically attriting the German fighter force. In the air, on the ground, at airfields, at training bases. By mid, the B-17 had become less a precision bombing instrument and more the anvil against which American fighter power shattered the Luftwaffe. Part 5. The numbers. What the B-17 actually accomplished. The scale of the B-17's contribution to the Allied war effort is almost impossible to comprehend in human terms. The B-17 Flying Fortress was not the most elegant bomber of the Second World War. It was not the fastest, not the highest altitude, and not always the most accurate. The doctrine it was built to execute, daylight precision bombing, proved far more costly in human lives than its architects had promised or imagined. But it was there, every day, in numbers that the German war machine ultimately could not defeat. It absorbed the worst that the Luftwaffe and the flak batteries could deliver, and it kept coming back. And in doing so, it gave the American fighter pilots the opportunity to destroy German air power in a war of attrition that the Luftwaffe never recovered from. The air crew who flew it earned every myth that grew up around the machine they trusted with their lives. They flew into the most dangerous skies in the history of aviation, at an age when most of us were still figuring out who we were, in defense of a world that didn't fully understand what they were doing, or how close it came to being lost. General Spaatz was right. Without the B-17, the war might have gone differently. But more than that, without the men who flew it, the machine was just aluminum and engines. And it was never just that.